Assalamualaikum, dear viewers. Welcome to our study circle. We are studying the Quran, the Hadith, and the Bible in these sessions, which, of course, belong to the first segment. And in the second segment, we study a particular aspect of Islam in which either there is some misconception or there are other issues that need to be sorted out. So, the Quranic verse that's going to be discussed today is actually verse 177 of Surah Baqarah, and it is one of the most important verses which tell us what exactly virtue and what exactly loyalty to God is all about. So just let me read out this verse before you, and then we can discuss. So it says, لَيْسَ الْبِرَّ أَن تُوَلُّوا وُجُوهَكُمْ قِبَلَ الْمَشْرِقِ وَالْمَغْرِبِ ولكن البر من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر والملائكة والكتاب والنبيين وآتى المال على حبه ذوي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل والسائلين وفي الرقاب وأقام الصلاة وآتى الزكاة والموفون بعهدهم إذا عاهدوا والصابرين في البأساء والضراء وحين البأس أولئك الذين صدقوا وأولئك هم المتقون. Loyalty to God does not merely consist in facing the east or the west in the prayer, but loyalty is the loyalty of those who believe in God, in the last day, in the angels of God, in divine books, and in the prophets of God, and who, though they love it dearly, give away their wealth to the kindred, the orphans, the needy, the traveler, and to those who ask for the liberation of necks, and who are diligent in their prayer and pay zakat, and of those who stand by their word when they give it, and especially of those who are steadfast in scarcity, illness, and war. These are the people who are truthful to God in fulfilling the promise of loyalty to Him, and these are the ones who are in fact God fearing. So, dear viewers, you can clearly see this very important Quranic verse actually tells us what does constitute loyalty to God. All of us are loyal or are supposed to be loyal and faithful servants of the Almighty. But at times we get entangled in the outward form of ritual so much that we tend to lose sight of its spirit. We tend to lose sight of the soul of that directive. And it is exactly what had happened at the time of the advent of the last prophet with the Jews of his times. They were after fulfilling certain directives by sacrificing the spirit in those directives, by actually disregarding the spirit in those directives. And here we have been cautioned, and here we have been prodded that instead of getting entangled in the apparent form of things or in getting involved in trivial things, we should think that loyalty towards God, faithfulness towards God, has a very deeper meaning. And the context, dear viewers, of this verse is that in the times of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Jews and the Christians were fighting regarding the Qibla. They used to say that some of them would say that East is their Qibla, and the other one group would say that the West is their Qibla. So it is here that the Quran has cautioned and prodded us that loyalty to God does not find itself manifested in these debates as to where we should face God. But real loyalty to God, as this verse spells out so beautifully, it says that real loyalty consists of those who sincerely believe in the Almighty, in the last day, in the angels of God, in divine books, and in the prophets of God. So the first thing that has been spelled out here is that if you are a true believer, you have to show yourself as a true believer by truly and in a sense believing what actually is meant by having faith in the Almighty. You have to trust the Almighty. You have to regard Him as your Savior. He is our everlasting friend. He is a friend that we can take for granted, actually. We have so many friends, they are all temporary, they are all ephemeral. And if there is a permanent friend that we can boast of, that we can really have, who we can talk to, who we can really communicate our innermost desires and pray to, it is the Lord, it is the Almighty. So the first thing which this verse spells out is to have a very deep God connection. A deep God connection makes us internally strong. You see, just as our body needs fodder and food to remain strong, our soul also needs food. And the best food which you can provide to your soul is this strong God connection. If your God connection is strong, you'll find yourself resisting evil. You'll find yourself not falling prey to the lures of this world. And you'll find yourself staying in this world, fighting your desires, and paying back to the society that you live in. The second thing which is mentioned here is that there are those who believe in the last day, which of course is an expression of the fact that people have this sense of accountability in them. They are not people who do deeds or who do things without the fear of accountability. Whenever they do something in life, whenever they take a decision in life, they always think that I would be accountable before God for what I am going to take today. So the day of judgment is the day of accountability. At times, our accountability does take place in this world, but many a time, this accountability, in its perfect sense, will take place in the hereafter. So, the second thing which is mentioned here is that true believers or true loyalty towards God is to really believe that we are going to be held accountable for everything that we do. We shall be responsible for every act and every belief that we profess. And hence, if we are able to go through this process of self accountability every day, there's all the more chance that on the day of judgment, we, inshallah, will arise on that day of judgment with as people who would be really successful and who would be proud to face their Lord. And the next thing which is mentioned is that they believe in the angels of God. The believing in the angels of God, dear viewers, actually means that because the Almighty does not directly interact with the human beings because of a number of reasons. So there is this intermediary step with which he does interact, and this intermediary step actually is a whole battalion of angels. It's a whole group of angels through which he interacts with people. And if this belief is not considered to be important, then it is here that this beliefs of superstition and the aloofness of the Almighty and consequently polytheism gives rise. Because people think that since we cannot reach the Almighty, since He's an aloof being, so therefore there has to be some intermediary through which they can reach God. And you must also remember that in the times of the Prophet Muhammad, angels were actually regarded as daughters of God. And the mushrikun or the idolaters of Arabia thought that if they could seek the pleasure of these daughters of God, they will have their way with the Almighty on the day of judgment. So it's like cautioning us and prodding us that instead of regarding them to be people who are actually regarding them to be true intermediaries between the Almighty and mankind, they regard them to be as these intermediaries, and they do not worship them as if they are deities of the Almighty or are partners of the Almighty. And then it says that they believe in divine books. And again, this means that they believe in all divine books, not just the book that is revealed to them. And this is an object lesson for all of us, dear viewers, that we have to believe not only in the Quran, but also in all scriptures. And these include the Torah, the Zabur, and the Injil, which is the gospel. So we have to study the gospels, we have to study the Torah, and we have to believe in it as a book of God. And our faith is not complete unless we profess faith in these divine books of God. And then the verse goes on to say that they are ones who believe in the prophets of God. And again, belief in the prophets of God has to be a comprehensive belief. It's not just belief in the prophet who we are supposed to believe because he is the prophet who brought our religion to us. No, we have to believe in all prophets of God. And we have to actually, the Quran at one place says, "La nufarriqu bayna ahadim bi rasuli," which means that we do not discriminate, we do not differentiate between the messengers of God. We profess faith in them. And this actually is an expression of the fact that religion or divine religion has come from the same source, which is the Almighty, in various periods of time to various prophets of God. And the basic message of all religions is the same. And that is God is one. And one day we shall be held accountable on the basis of our own deeds before Him. This basic message has been taught by each and every prophet, right from Adam, right up to the Prophet Muhammad, who was the final of all prophets. It was the same message which was actually taught to all of us. And hence, when the Quran says that we have to believe in all the prophets of God, it actually does tell us that we must not discriminate, we must not differentiate. And then, dear viewers, the verse goes on to say that وَآتَ الْمَالَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ, that in spite of the fact that we do love our wealth, we do need our wealth, but we still spend it on the kindred. And then you can clearly see in the verse that the heads of the spending, they are enumerated. It says that وَآتَ الْمَالَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ ذَوِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْيَتَامَى وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَابْنَ السَّبِيلِ, which means that in spite of being in need, in spite of being in want of wealth, true believers are ones who actually spend out of this on their kindred, on the orphans, on the needy, and on the travelers. So, this is how we have to behave in life. And let me point this out to you also that at one place in the Quran, the Almighty, while praising the utmost quality of believers, has said, يُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ, which means that in spite of being in need, believers give preference to the needs of others. Subhanallah, which actually means that we sacrifice our needs so that the needs of other people can be fulfilled. And this is the ultimate form of charity. That I need the money, I need my resources, and here comes a person who needs them equally badly. And I give away that money. And I have heard so many people say that when a person does so, he can experience God. We cannot touch God, we cannot see God, but we can experience God. And the way we can experience Him is that when we give away this money that we want it so badly, when a person comes along, it has happened to so many people who have told us their story that somehow or the other, when our own need arises, the Almighty fills our pockets with much more than we had given away. It's just a question of testing our faith. It's testing our trust in God that if we give away, we'll receive manyfold. And before that need actually is fulfilled, we will get that money in our pocket somehow or the other. I've seen so many examples. So if we want to experience God, if we want to have a taste of how we have this godliness connection with Him, the best way is that we spend in His cause even when we are in want, and we actually would be taken care of Him in this way. And this verse actually says that people who ask and وَالسَّائِلِينَ وَفِي الرِّقَابِ, for the liberation of necks, and for those who ask. Of course, we know that in the times of the Prophet, this institution of slavery persisted in Arabia. And for that, there was a general appeal which was made by the Prophet and by the Quran that necks should be liberated. People should spend their money by buying out these slaves, by making them useful individuals of the society. And ultimately, one day, when the directive of Muqatabat was revealed, we were told that we have to free all slaves, come what may, if they wanted their liberation, and if they gave us this guarantee that they would not become an economic burden to the society. And this is how slavery was gradually put an end to right in the time of the Prophet. It is very unfortunate that it still existed in spite of these efforts, in spite of these directives which the Quran laid down for us. But here we have been directed by the Quran that we must spend our money to buy out slavery. And today, if you would like to have an analogy, we can clearly see that there are so many prisoners which are languishing in jails, which they do not have bail money. They have served out their sentences at times, and they only need money to get themselves out of that jail. They have gone through everything. So today, by analogy, that money can be used to liberate such people from jail who have served their sentences, but they are not in a position to pay the penalty or some of the other dues which are on them. And then the verse goes on to say, وَأَقَامَ الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَ الزَّكَاةَ, that these are the two things which are so important in our religion. One of them connects us to the Almighty, and the other one connects us to our brethren. So aqama salat means that we are diligent in our prayer. It's not just that we would like to do something and just get it off our necks by simply going through the motions. But aqama salat actually means that we are very punctual in the prayer. We are persistent in our prayer. We actually feel this strong God connection when we stand in the prayer, because we feel that we are standing in the presence of the Almighty and talking to Him. All these measures constitute aqama salat, being diligent in the prayer. And of course, as the next part says, ita is zakah, that we, as an obligatory sum of money, also give a statutory part of our wealth in relation to these heads which I mentioned here. So zakat, or being compassionate to individuals through this institution of zakat, is something which connects us to our brethren. So these two pillars of, I would say, these two pillars of our faith, one of them connects us to God. And the prayer is the foremost thing which connects us to God, the namaz. And then we have zakat, which actually connects us to our brethren, so that those who are in need, those who are in a spot of bother, we can help them through our means and resources. And in this way, people in this society who are left far behind in the race of life, who cannot earn for themselves, or who live below the poverty line, they are catered by the society and by the government as well. And then we will look what the Quran says. Wal mufuna bi ahdihim iza ahadu, which means that whenever they make a commitment, they honor that commitment. They do not go back on their words. They honor their commitment. When they give their word, they may lay down their lives, but they will not go back on their word. Such is the importance of this promise. And we must realize ourselves that how heartily and how generously we break promises. We make promises, and right at the time that we are making a promise, we do know that we'll not be able to honor it. At times we know that, but in spite of that, we make this promise, and then we end up going back on that promise. The Quran is very critical of such people, and it has to be, because you see, religion itself is a covenant that we make with the Almighty. It's called Misak. Misak means a promise that we make to the Almighty that will abide by Him. So therefore, when the Quran says, "Wal mufuna iza ahadu," it actually gives this stress that once you make a commitment, we will give our word, we will not go back on our word. We might lay down our lives, but we will honor our commitment. We will honor our word. And we can actually examine our own lives in the light of this Quranic directive, how we flout promises, how we make fun of these promises, how we don't even care that we have given a word. This is something really alarming, that a person who might commit himself or herself to something for someone at times totally forgets. He or she thinks that making a promise or giving a word is something which we can easily trample on. And this is something that really needs a lot of rethinking in our society. All of us as individuals are guilty of breaking oaths, guilty of breaking promises in some form or the other. Citizenship itself is a promise. Look how we flout this promise by breaking traffic lights, by not following traffic rules, by overspeeding, by underage driving, by making licenses and various other things without adopting the proper procedure. All these things constitute a breach of promise. We break laws at will. We break laws vehemently. And in fact, we feel proud when we break a law. And this is something which is really alarming. And we need to really make this fresh commitment to ourselves that come what may, when we give a word, we will never go back on our word. And the Almighty expects us that once we give our word to Him regarding following these basic precepts, we have to follow them and in no way break our promise. And then the word says that whatever the condition, they spend in wasabirina fil ba'sa'i was dharra'i wa hinal ba's, that believers are patient, they persevere in times of scarcity, in times of illness, in times of war. So these are the three times which really test us. They are really pushing times. They see our mettle, they test our mettle, whether we are really people who in these times remain patient or not. So it says, وَالصَّابِرِينَ فِي الْبَأْسَاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ وَحِينَ الْبَأْسِ, that they are the ones who are patient and steadfast in scarcity, in illness, and in war, in all these conditions when we are being tested and tried by the Almighty. Of course, it's a very difficult thing to be steadfast, to be patient, simply because things, when they really push us up, they become tough. We tend to lose hope. We get frustrated. We get disappointed. So it is here that we have to make that concerted effort. We have to commit ourselves that come what may, I'll remain patient and steadfast because I'm passing through a trial of life. The Almighty is testing me. He is making me go through a trial so that I become stronger than before. All of us do realize that when we go through trials and we come out of trials, we are stronger than before. We get this opportunity of getting closer to the Almighty. When we are in good circumstances, we at times tend to forget God. But when we are in straitened circumstances, when we live in hard circumstances, there is a better chance of having that God connection. So in all these situations, if a believer remains patient, if he remains steadfast, if he perseveres in all these situations, the Quran says this is real loyalty to the Almighty. And then it says, Ulaika allazina sadaku wa ulaika humul muttaqun. So when after enumerating all these qualities, the Quran says, such are the people who are in fact fulfilling the promises of loyalty made with the Almighty. And these are the ones who are actually God-fearing. Ulaika humul muttaqun. They are the ones who have this God connection with them. They really have experienced how they can be and live in this life of tribulation, of trials, of hardships, of difficulties, by having that strong God connection. Dear viewers, this goes without saying that the stronger our God connection, the stronger will we fare in life, in tackling miseries, in tackling hard circumstances, because the biggest support that we can rely on is God. No one else is always there for us. All relationships, whether a person is our bosom friend, they're all temporary. Even with our bosom friend, there are so many things that we cannot discuss. There are so many things which we cannot even share. But with God, we need not share anything because He already knows it. We can talk to God, we can rely on Him, we can have that strong connection. And the stronger that connection, the better chance we have in passing through this trial of life, in passing through these tough circumstances. And in spite of passing through these tough circumstances, our mental state is of a person who is serene, a person who is still comfortable, a person who is not bothered by hardships and difficulties. So, this is something that really should be our goal. It should be our very important mission in life, that we have to remain connected with one and only God Almighty. So, viewers, we now go on to the next part of our study circle, and this is the hadith of the day that we are going to study. It has been taken from the Al-Jami al-Sahih of Imam Muslim. So it says, on Jarir ibn Abdullah, قال سألت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن النزل فجاء فأمرني أن أصرف بصري. Jarir ibn Abdullah radiallahu anhu stated, I asked God's messenger about the sudden gaze on a non-mahram woman. He told me to turn my eyes. So, viewers, here one of the very important precepts of self-purification is discussed. Self-purification actually means that we cleanse our hearts from all filth and from all evil. And since our eyes are actually the windows of our hearts, so we have to keep our eyes pure. We must not lust through our eyes. And as has been narrated in some of the other ahadiths of the Prophet, that if we lust through our eyes, this is in fact the fornication of our eyes, of our sight, and we should avoid it at all costs, because every evil starts by our eyes. Every evil, one of the very strongest ways which can take us close towards evil is that we start looking towards evil things or towards provocative things, and hence we are advised that once our eyes take liberty, once our gaze takes liberty, then our own heart gets this filth involved in it, and we have to show this to ourselves, that we are individuals who are clean in our thoughts, who are clean and pure. And whenever we see a person of the opposite gender, we do not lust after that person. We do not look at the contours of his body or his physical shape, but rather we look at him as if we would be looking towards our own father or our brother or our sister or our mother. Just as when we look at them, we do not let our eyes take liberty. In a similar way, the Almighty here in the Quran and also in this hadith, which I have just read out, has told us that we must not lust after other people. We must not look at other people and especially physically enjoying their attributes, because this is something which will inculcate some evil in our hearts, and we will have this addiction of looking after other women, and women, of course, would have this addiction of looking towards other men. So instead of remaining faithful to one's husband, if one gets addicted to seeing other women or other men, likewise, the institution of the family is severely dented, and the love and affection and the bond which should remain between the spouses is dented very badly. Because here what we are doing is that we are fantasizing, or we are imagining other women or other men in our lives and connecting ourselves mentally to them, which is directly proportionate to the fact that we are distancing ourselves from our own wife. And if we are not married, then we are getting that addiction deeply rooted in our body, in our own minds, in which we would tend to settle ourselves, tend to satisfy ourselves and comfort ourselves by lusting after women about whom we have to be very respectful of. So, viewers, we now study the Bible verse of the day, and this Bible verse is, in fact, an extraordinary sermon of the prophet Jesus, which is recorded in the Gospel of Luke, verses 27 to 49. These are such beautiful and moving words that I think if I just read them out to you, you will enjoy as much as anyone who reads them and feel this spiritual uplifting, spiritual enhancement in him, because this is something which really is so close to our nature. So it goes like this: be full of pity, even as your Father is full of pity. Of course, we have to realize that wherever the word Father is used in the Bible, it actually refers to the Almighty, and used in a figurative and a metaphorical sense. So be full of pity, even as your Father is full of pity. He not judges of others, and you will not be not judges of others, and you will not be judged. Do not give punishment to others, and you will not get punishment yourselves. Make others free, and you will be made free. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, crushed down, full, and running over, they will give to you. For in the same measure as you give, it will be given to you again. And he gave them teaching in the form of a story, saying, is it possible for one blind man to be guide to another? Will they not go falling together like into a hole? The disciple is not greater than his master, but everyone whose learning is complete will be like his master. How beautiful and how fantastic these words are. And why do you take note of the grain of dust in your brother's eye, but take no note of the bit of wood which is in your eye? How will you say to your brother, brother, let me take the grain of dust out of your eye, when you yourself do not see the bit of wood in your eye? O false one, first take the wood out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to take the dust out of your brother's eye. For no good tree gives bad fruit, and no bad tree gives good fruit. For every tree is judged by its fruit. Men do not get figs from thorns, or grapes from blackberry plants. The good man out of the good store of his the good man out of the good store of his heart gives good things, and the evil man out of his evil store gives evil. For out of the full store of the heart come the words of the mouth. Why do you say to me, Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say? Everyone who comes to me and gives ear to my words and does them, I will make clear to you what he is like. He is like a man building a house. He's like a man building a house who went deep and put the base of it on a rock. And when the water came up and the river was driving against that house, it was not moved, because the building was good. But he who gives hearing without doing is like a man building a house on the earth without a base for it. And when the force of the river beat against it, straightway it came down, and the destruction of that house was great. So, dear viewers, you can see how fantastically Jesus has given us this instruction. He has used such beautiful examples, so many beautiful phrases. In spite of the fact that this is a translation of the original, we still move, we still get that feeling that we are actually listening to something divine, because only prophets of God can speak the way Jesus has just spoken in these words. And I can really say that had we possessed the original words, which were, of course, should have been in Syriac, the original language of Jesus, we would have been even more moved and even more influenced, because there is no replacement to the original language. This is just a translation. And look how a translation has affected us. And we can well imagine how the original would have affected us had we had them. So you can see that Jesus here is actually trying to give focus to the fact that we have to look deep down. We must not look towards things the way they look up to us apparently. Because what is apparent is not always the same to what actually it is. At times, the essence is different from what it appears to be outwardly. And then we have to realize that whatever is said is being said in such a powerful language, and with such powerful similes, with such moving metaphors, that it's like magic, it's like music to our ears. And so, therefore, I would advise all my listeners that whenever they get the time, they must read the Bible from various places, especially the Gospels, the New Testament, various parts of the New Testament, the Gospel of Matthew to start with. And if they get time, they can go on to read the Proverbs of Solomon and the Psalms of David, equally moving. And these are some of the areas in which we can really supplement our study of the Quran by studying other divine scriptures. So, viewers, with these words, we come to an end to this session, or this first session of our study circle. In case you have any questions, take up those questions. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next part of our study circle. So, I can see Ms. Rafia Khwaja. I'm going to unmute your mic, madam. You can please go ahead. Your mic is self-muted. Kindly unmute your mic and please share your question with us. Your mic is self-muted. Please unmute your mic. Kindly unmute your mic. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Please go ahead. Please kindly speak a little louder. I can't hear you.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
I have two questions. One, my question is that one of the problems we are seeing among the youth in this world is they want to know about the existence of God, and they somehow feel that it's a challenge because during the time of the prophets, God intervened among the people, but now there's no intervention. So you sometimes hear some of them think, why can't Allah show us a miracle there? He's there. Someone I heard said that, oh, like you have a writing in the sky saying, Allah says, I'm here. So I wanted to know, how do we try to convince these people? Do we try to convince them of the existence of God through emotions or through reasons? And
Well,
can I give you my second question, or should I wait?
let me answer this first question first.
Okay.
Actually, we need to understand that as far as God is concerned, the best way to prove the existence of God is through our own introspection, through our own intuition, because God is found in our own self. His comprehension is found in our own self. The fact is that atheism or lack of this God connection is spreading because of the fact that our true comprehension of the Almighty, or the way we picture the Almighty, every person has his own perception of the Almighty, and he wants the actual perception to fit into that perception. And this does not always happen. You see, the principle which the Almighty has enumerated in the Quran is that He gives miracles to His prophets. And the reason for giving these miracles is so that other people can understand that the prophets of God who have been sent in their own times are actually His messengers. And in order to focus the attention of people, at times these miracles are shown. And similarly, at times, to conclusively convey the truth, these miracles are shown. As far as we are concerned, who live in an era in which prophethood is no longer there, we still can see miracles. And I can say that although it's not a guaranteed thing, but hasn't this happened that so many times we make a supplication to God, we pray to God, and then that prayer is answered. It's answered even in a better way than we had prayed. What is this? This is nothing less than a miracle. And look at the fact that at times the person is dying, at times he has a severe illness, and the doctors actually give up, and that person still survives. There are so many examples in which people have survived in spite of the fact that the doctors have given up on that person. So you see, miracles are never given on the demand of the people. Even at the times of the prophets, when people used to demand miracles, the reply they would get from the Almighty is that I will send miracles when I deem them appropriate at appropriate times. It's not at your demand that I'm going to give miracles, because God is governing this universe according to His own grand scheme. But I can tell you that even today, these miracles do happen. When children get saved, look at the story of that boy who got saved while his ship or his actually raft was floating for 6 or 7 days in a deep sea, and he kept on floating. That raft kept on floating, and somehow it was spotted. It was a miracle that that boy still survived. So you see, it's just a question of opening our eyes around us and see the miracle happening every day. Look at the miracle of your own on your own house. I can see one of the most miraculous things in my life is the relationship which every child has with the mother. Look at how a mother behaves towards the child. She sacrifices everything. She, even if she is beaten up, even if she's abused, even if she's treated very harshly, look what happens. She prays for that disobedient child of her. She never ever has any bad words for her. Isn't this for that child? Isn't this less than a miracle that people who are really maltreated, even then they end up praying for you? You see, we have to find these miracles around us. They do exist, and instead of demanding miracles, we must discover these miracles.
You're right. I've also said that one of the biggest miracles is the birth of a child. And if you tell some of these people that read the Quran, first of all, they have to be interested, and secondly, they have to read it with understanding. So I
Mhm.
do understand the point you've made of miracles. My second question is that when can one invest money in these government schemes like the defense certificate, Behbood certificate, national certificate, because there is the question of whether there is sood involved. If we can ensure that the money invested by the government is in stocks or in good profit giving projects, is it all right to put our money in this and take interest?
So you see, as far as these schemes are concerned, they cannot be classified as interest per se because of the fact that the profit which the government gives in return varies, and it is not according to the demand that we make. It's according to what they can give us. So one of the things which make a something or some transaction as interest is that you make the condition. The lender tells the borrower that this is my money and you have to return, or you give me this return on such and such a rate. So it's not interest per se, although it does have some parts of it in that scheme. But as far as old people are concerned, as far as widows are concerned, as far as individuals who are literally helpless are concerned, I would say that they can perhaps benefit from this scheme, and because it's not interest per se, although there are some things which do resemble it. But given the conditions of our society and given the fact that our uh, widows or people of elderly age do not have any alternative to survive but to invest in such things, so I would say that if they will do it, hopefully the element which is still in a gray area and which can still be regarded as interest would be forgiven by the Almighty, because, as I said, it's not clear interest. There are elements which do make it closer to interest. However, because of the fact that there is no other opportunity for elderly people to have a annual or a monthly regular return, this is something which they can perhaps do. Okay, so I think that I now have a question from Mr. Mushtaq Khan. Uh, I'm going to unmute your mics, sir. So your mic is now unmuted. Please go ahead with your question.
Yes, Dar Saab. My question is about Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Uh, how was his overall uh, lifestyle
Mm-hmm.
before uh, the revelation came, during the revelation when nobody followed him in Mecca,
Mm-hmm.
and then later on when he migrated to Medina and people started following him? How did he change in his practice and other normal lifestyle?
Okay, so that's a very good question and seldom asked. So I'd like to reply in some detail because this is something which has a very important repercussion vis-a-vis the life of the Prophet himself and the way he conducted himself. So as far as his initial time was concerned, we do not have a lot of details in our books, very authentic details, but the authentic part which I can relate to you is that when he married Khadija radiallahu anha, he became a very rich person because of the merchandise he would take in various trade journeys to other parts of Arabia, and his merchandise or the merchandise of his wife Khadija would travel with him, and he would trade them this merchandise in the other parts, and he would earn a fair amount of profit. And this continued in his Meccan life. So once the migration took place in Medina, when the Prophet was actually also made the ruler of Medina, his lifestyle totally changed. And one of the reasons which because of which this change took place was that in the one of the areas of his own territory was confined to people who could not obtain a good household in the Muakhat or the Brotherhood of Medina. We know that when the people migrated to Medina, so a lot of Muhajirun and the Ansar, they got together and they had the Ansar welcomed the Muhajirun and gave them a lot of support and help. But in spite of that, there was still a large number of Muhajirun which could not be accommodated by the Ansar. And they were called the Ashabu Sufa, or the people who actually stayed close to the Masjid of the Prophet, the Masjid Nabawi. They stayed there, they lived there, they lodged there, and the Prophet at times would actually try to fulfill their needs. And for this, he himself would remain hungry just to feed those people because there was a large quantity of the Muhajirun who were living in the Mosque of Medina. And because of the fact that the Prophet felt that they were his responsibility, so we do find so many historical narratives which told us that at times the Prophet only had a date, one single date, which he would consume, and at times he would whatever food would come to him or would be cooked in his house, he would have it distributed among these people of these Muhajirun. And we have Aisha radiallahu anha telling us that at times the stove of the Prophet would not be lit up simply because of the fact that he would be more anxious to give whatever he had to comfort those Muhajirun who were there living in the mosque. So this was how they were treated. And once the state of Medina prospered and some amount of betterment came along, still the Prophet actually adopted the life of a very common person. He was very rich in Mecca. He had a substantial amount of income, but when he migrated to Medina, first for the reason of these Ashabu Sufa, and then for the reason that he wanted to live the life of a common person so that people could understand that if they have to become rulers, they have to live a life in which they can get a taste of how poor people live or how people who are not privileged they live. So he actually lived the life of a common person, and for this even he had to at times take loan for himself. We do know that the issue of the famous issue in which he actually borrowed a camel or borrowed some things from a person, and that person actually came back and asked him in a very harsh way to return what he had borrowed. And the Prophet said that he still needed some more time, and that person was slightly more harsh, even more harsh. And he became a little angry. And the Prophet, when the Sahaba saw that person getting angry, the Prophet actually said, Inna sahib al haqqi la maqala, that don't be angry if that person is angry because I owe him something.
Yeah.
He is to whom I owe something. So if he is demanding that with some heart, it's his right. So this is how he behaved, and we can clearly see that later on in the spoils of war, one of the heads of the spoils of war, which was fixed, was that the war booty was to be distributed to the ruler of to the ruling state as well. So the Prophet's share was also fixed in that war booty as well, so that he could take care of his own expenses. So this is how it gradually progressed from a person who was very rich in Mecca, from a person who migrated to Medina and then looked after the whole migrants who came there. And at times he would not eat simply to make them eat. And then when his state of affluence, although was still there, but he still chose to live as a common man so that he could set this example that whenever Muslim leader or a Muslim ruler comes to power and he has the reins of power to him, he should behave as a common person.
But why are we not behaving that way?
So that's very unfortunate. Actually, we are not behaving in so many other uh, affairs the way the Prophet wanted us to behave. So it's
Yeah.
not of being not following him in this particular area. Don't we lie every day? Are not we unjust? Are we not people who are selfish? Are we not people who break our promises? So yeah, there are so many other areas that in which we are not following the Quran, in which not following the Prophet himself. And this is just one another area in which our rulers, they think that they are kings and they live in a royal fashion whenever they get the chance to, instead of realizing that every single penny that they earn as a civil servant is a trust of the Almighty, and they have to actually be extremely careful. We do remember Umar ibn Abdul Aziz's famous reign of just about 2 years, in which he remained the caliph, that he changed his whole lifestyle. He was a very princely person. He was a person who would actually wear clothes in a very, very fashionable way. But as soon as he became a king, we know that he became a pauper. So he became a pauper. He actually was a person who had tags in his and rags in his dress, simply because of the fact that he wanted to live as an ordinary person. And we know that the Caliph Umar, when he was there, he actually passed this order that people should use the things given to by the government, like for example the paper. They should tighten the spaces between the lines, shorten the spaces between the lines, so that less paper can be used in writing, so that government officials are very, very responsible in consuming goods which are provided by the government. So all these things are examples which we find in history, which are still there for us to read and study. But what can we do if people are not willing to do that? Because no one can make a horse drink water. No one can change a person unless that person wants to change himself or herself.
But
All that we can
those examples are almost 1400 years ago, and
yeah,
we have not been able to do anything about it. So something is really wrong with the Muslims, that we are not really following the
right.
teachings of Islam and the example of our Prophet.
Obviously there's something very wrong, but at the same time you see there are so many people who are still following the Prophet. For example, there are people who might not pray, might not fast, but they don't drink, they don't go near pork, they don't commit adultery. So don't forget that still we have people who might not be following a lot of things that Islam says, but still they have this regard that if they might fast, they might pray, they might not fast, they might not pray, but at times they are very, very careful in fulfilling the rights of their brethren. So it's not like a all dismal situation. I would say it's selectively dismal, and there have been eras in our history in which we can see examples set by common people. Even today, I can see people around me, like people like, for example, Abdul Sattar Edi, if you know Pakistan. There's many other people who live for others, who create this example, who shine like a torch in the darkness that we find ourselves today. So we do have these examples in which people try to follow, but the only thing is that they have to be seen with a very keen eye. And if we try to spot them, I'm sure we can pick a lot of examples, not from our illustrious elite, but from common people. I know people as firefighters who gave up their lives at times to save people, people who actually sacrifice their own children just to save the children of other people. So these things are still here in our society. It's just a question of spotting them and having a keen eye about them.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. So, okay, viewers, now it's the very last end of our study circle. The misconception actually that what I'd like to cover today, which I will do in a very brief way, is exactly what I had pointed out earlier, and that is scripture reading. And scripture reading, dear viewers, is something that all of us must be very, very diligent about. When I say scripture, I actually refer to divine scriptures in particular. So, besides studying the Quran, we must try to study other scriptures very, very diligently as well, as far as we can. Thus, for example, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Psalms, the Gita, which is of course the foremost book of Hinduism, is you'll be very surprised to know that Gita is a book in which there's not a single thing which can be related to polytheism. Polytheism, which we so commonly relate to Hinduism, was a much later addition. In even the Gita, or I would say not the Gita, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, it's the Ved. The Veds, which were the earliest scriptures of the Muslims, of the Hindus, if you study the Veds, the Rig Ved and other Veds, which are still, you can still find on the internet, you will clearly see that in this regard, the what has been told to us is something very difficult, and we need to understand that in this regard, what we need to know is that studying other scriptures is very essential. We should not preclude them. We should not treat them as if they are not scriptures of God. Of course, they can be translations. They're not preserved in their own original language. But studying the Bible, studying other divine scriptures, or studying the Veds, as I just said, will give us this fresh experience that other ummas and other communities are also monotheistic, or if they are not monotheistic anymore, at least to start with, they were monotheistic and they were monotheists. This will give us this further connection and this further boost between various sections of our religions, and the bond of humanity will go stronger. So my extreme and my humble request to all of those who are hearing me is that we must take out time. Besides studying the Quran, we must study some of the scriptures at leisure, and once we do so, we'll be pleasantly surprised how beautifully they complement the last and the final testament, which is the Quran. So, viewers, with these words, we come to an end to this segment of our study circle. Hope to see you next week, inshallah, on the same time. Remember, it's the daylight saving time because of that, which has been changed. We are now back to our previous times, which is an hour earlier. And with that, I take leave. So it's Khuda Hafiz.